You've brought yourself here, not to learn something urgent, nor to chase another answer, but perhaps simply to feel something gentler. To sit, not in silence, but in stillness. A place where nothing demands anything from you. And so, in this story, you won't be asked to follow or to keep up or even to understand everything. Instead, just drift. Like a cat sunbathing on a windowsill, not minding whether the sun leaves or stays. This is not a story about loneliness. It's a story about how loneliness dissolves, quietly, without a fight, when you no longer feel like something is missing. You met the old cat on a gray Thursday. Not a sad day exactly, just weightless. A day when time moved like dust in a sunbeam, when nothing really needed to happen. And so nothing really did. Not waiting, not needing, just being. She was already there when you arrived, perched on the stone wall, paws folded, back curved like a question mark that had stopped asking. You thought you might sit with her, to give her some company, because something about her looked alone, didn't purr, didn't shift closer. Her silence wasn't distant, it was whole. Somewhere nearby, a moth flitted close to the light, and the cat's ears twitched, but she didn't chase. She blinked. No compulsion to fill it with meaning, or noise, or comfort. She was the comfort. Not because she gave it, but because she didn't need it. You tried a soft voice. She blinked again, slower this time. Eventually, you stopped trying, and something in you stopped bracing. Looked at you, just once, not as a greeting, but as a quiet confirmation. You'd finally stopped trying to fix the moment. Not because she asked you to, but because the air around you now felt different. Less like waiting, more like resting. Then she leapt down, not with drama, not even with grace, just with enough, and walked away. She doesn't speak much these days, but her cat, her only companion, has learned the language of breathing, of stillness, of things that don't need names. How she didn't need you, and somehow that healed something deeper than if she had. You hadn't kept her company. She had kept your silence, keeping her company. But over time, you realized it wasn't her who needed you. It was you who needed her quiet, her assurance that wholeness isn't earned, that it doesn't come from being seen or held or praised. It's what's left when nothing is missing. Like she already had everything she needed, tucked into the folds of her stillness. Let's rest here, a little longer in the memory of a cat who never asked for more than what was already present. The way her tail curled and uncurled every few minutes like a punctuation mark in a long, meandering sentence. She was old, you realized. The kind of old that doesn't count in years, but in the number of things no longer feared. But the moment you settled beside her, she didn't move, didn't acknowledge you. For a while, you tried anyway. You offered your hand. The street was quiet. A breeze passed through the trees, moving not for purpose, but for rhythm. It occurred to you, she had no urge to make this moment more than it was. You began to slow down, not because she asked you to, but because her pace was so convincing, so complete. You noticed the way her fur rose and fell with each breath. You'd thought you were doing something kind, sitting beside her. She stood up once, slowly, stretched each leg with ancient patience. You remained. In the days that followed, you'd sometimes think of her, that old cat, and her unhurried presence. And far away, in another quiet room of the world, an elderly woman stands by a sun-drenched window. Let's go there next. But not just yet. You sat on the cracked stone wall. For weeks you'd brought offerings. A can of tuna, a saucer of cream, a warm blanket to ward off the chill. Not because the world had changed, but because your eyes had. The wind wasn't just cold anymore. It had weight and shape. It folded over rooftops, curved down alleys, and ran its invisible fingers through ivy leaves. The cat had not told you any of this. She had simply shown it by noticing, without trying. But she wanted none of it. The old cat regarded you with cool indifference. And you kept coming back anyway. Waiting for the kettle to boil, you watched the slow waver of steam, as if it were something sacred, as if it were enough to just watch it rise, curl, vanish. One day you noticed things differently. How it shifted from pale silver in the early hours to gold, and finally to a kind of charcoal blue that said everything was ending gently, not as a helper. But there was a slowness, not in what you did, but in how you carried yourself while doing it. Not even as a comforter, just as a quiet presence beside another. Some curled in tight spirals, others lounging like they were made of water. Even after she was gone, you began to carry her way of being with you. You sat by windows more often, not to see anything, just to feel the passing of the light. You didn't need to. Their silence didn't feel like a wall. It felt like a mirror. You didn't call it meditation. You didn't give it a name. You didn't even tell anyone. A kind of serenity you hadn't known how to name. She wasn't refusing company. She was simply already whole. And in her wholeness, there was room for everything, including you. But not in the way you'd expected. But there's no need to hurry there. Let's pause. Let the silence bloom just a little longer. Or had she simply reminded you of something you already knew? They do not wait to be completed. They simply find the warmest spot in the room, curl into themselves and sleep, knowing that everything they are is enough. A reminder that you too can be that complete, that calm, that undemanding. But had forgotten? That peace doesn't come from finally being seen, but from no longer needing to be. That stillness is not absence, but a kind of fullness that doesn't ask to be filled. That loneliness is not being alone, but believing you lack something. And that cats, real cats, not the ones in our stories, have always known this. It was just something the cat left behind in you. Just the feeling of her presence, unmoved by your effort, unimpressed by your noise, and yet never pushing you away. You returned to the wall one afternoon, the same place you'd first met her. Your footsteps were slower now, not in tiredness, but in unurgency. Just your breath, and the sky, and the soft scent of dust warming under sun. Slow, like punctuation between two thoughts that didn't need to finish. She wasn't there, of course, but the space still held her shape, as if the stillness had memorized her. You sat again, and this time you didn't bring an offering. No hand extended, no words prepared. You imagined her there again. Not vividly, no need to reconstruct the exact texture of her fur or the tilt of her ears. In your mind, she blinked again. You realized then what you'd mistaken for detachment was really not as a guest. Time passed differently now, not dramatically. You still had errands. You still answered emails, paid bills, waited in line. As if some part of you, some small, still placed within, had learned to sit beside an old cat who asked for nothing and offered everything. You began to notice other cats too, in windows, on fences, under parked cars. They all had that same unbothered presence. Some sleek, some scruffy. You never disturbed them. Sometimes you wondered, had that old cat taught you something? They do not ask the world to explain itself. So when you think of her, that old cat on the stone wall, you may feel a kind of ache, but it isn't longing. It's spaciousness, and if you listen, truly listen, you might hear the purr of something inside you finally settling down. Now we step into a quiet home, where two hearts, one human, one feline, have learned to move in rhythm. She didn't speak much anymore, not because she was bitter or tired of the world, but because the words had already done their work. Now, in the stillness of her small home, what remained was breath, memory, and routine. The woman lived at the edge of the village, a house made of wood and quiet. Every step creaked just slightly, as if the floorboards remembered footsteps from long ago and whispered them back slowly. The curtains were often drawn halfway. She took her tea alone. They simply moved through the same rooms at the same rhythm. No visitors came regularly. No voices echoed from the hallway. But she had a cat, not a kitten, not playful or performative. A cat that had grown old with her gray furred, with eyes like twilight and movements like wind over water. Back when the house still echoed with clinking dishes and the rustling of newspapers and the murmur of radio voices. Back when her laughter wasn't something she kept tucked away in a drawer. Just a word here or there, like placing a pebble into a bowl of water, soft, barely a ripple. Had sat on the windowsill the morning the ambulance came, tail flicking slowly, like a metronome, measuring the seconds of change. Not the warm, sentimental kind, but a deeper knowing that he had not judged her slowness, that he had accepted her silence. Soft steps on old wood, a pause near the bedroom door, a thump as he leapt onto the dresser, where he could see the moonlight stretching like silver cloth across the floor. That he had remained not out of duty, but because there was nowhere else he needed to be. Or, that cat is all she has left. But they would be wrong. So gently, completely wrong. She had everything. Because she had let go of the idea that something was missing. And the cat, he wasn't all she had. He was just the one who had stayed, not to complete her, but to accompany her wholeness. And after the silence fell, the cat didn't try to fix it. You're up early. Or, it's colder today. Or sometimes, nothing at all. Because he didn't need her language to understand her breath. No longer chased weeds from the stone path. But the cat would still go there, in the late afternoons. He would sit under the bent tree, the one that had survived more storms than either of them, and blink toward the horizon, not looking for anything, just witnessing her rhythm, her grief that had stopped aching and become texture. She flinched at the thunder, not from fear, but from memory. The cat, usually indifferent to weather, leapt onto her bed. He didn't curl against her. He didn't purr. He simply sat there, between her and the world, like a sentinel who had nothing to prove. And she reached out just once, laying a hand softly on his back, felt the hum of his breath. And in that moment, she didn't miss anything. Not the past, not the people, not even the years. She was present, entirely, with him and with herself. She was not lonely, though, from the outside. It may have seemed so. They did not cuddle, not often. They did not pose for photographs or wear costumes or engage in antics. Sharing the quiet with her, without trying to take it away. The cat would already be watching, from the windowsill or the edge of the bed. Not waiting, just observing the way light returned each day, as if to confirm that nothing essential had been lost overnight. two beings no longer trying to be understood. In the mornings, she would rise slowly. While she poured her tea, he would leap up to the windowsill, gazing at nothing in particular, and she would glance at him just once. A glance not born of concern, but of agreement. We are here. We are whole. That is enough. She would boil water. He would follow not underfoot, but nearby, the way a shadow follows without clinging. Some days she spoke to him, not in baby talk, not in songs. The way he moved beside her was already more than words, and she didn't need his affection to feel his presence. They had been together long before her husband passed. The cat had seen it all, had curled under the table during dinner, had brushed against ankles during arguments. He didn't offer comfort. He didn't meow insistently. He simply stayed. Sometimes staying is the most honest form of love. The garden outside grew wild over time. She no longer pruned the rose bush. She would watch from the window sometimes, teacup in hand, and feel a strange kind of comfort. There were nights she couldn't sleep, not often anymore, but sometimes. And during those nights, she would hear him moving through the house. She would listen not with worry, but with recognition. He wasn't restless. He was simply awake, like her. Once, during a storm, the wind howled hard against the windows. Some might look at them and say, "She has no one." She had once been a woman of many roles, a teacher, a wife, a mother, for a brief, glowing span, a neighbor, a baker of fig tarts that always crumbled too easily in the center and were still everyone's favorite. But now her life had simplified. There were no bells to wake her, no small hands to guide, no papers to grade, no one to expect her at dinner, and no questions that needed answering. Some days she did not speak at all, and yet not once did she feel invisible, because he saw her. The cat, with his slow blinking gaze, his patient understanding of the way she moved through time, they had created a rhythm over the years, not out of obligation, but from something softer, a mutual respect for quiet days. He never scratched the doors, never cried for food before she stirred. He waited, trusted that what needed to come would come. When she placed his bowl down each morning, there was no rush to eat. She to her armchair by the east window, he to the rug warmed by the same golden patch of sun. She would wash the teacups slowly, and he would stretch across the threshold, watching the sky fade to copper. Instead, he would approach like a guest invited, tail gently swaying, as if acknowledging the small ceremony of it all. And after breakfast, they each went to their corners. There was a chair beside her bed, just low enough for him to reach. She'd turn her head, see the silhouette of his ears, the slow rhythm of his tail resting over the chair's edge. And she'd remember, not everything, but enough, that she was home, that the silence was shared, that she was still accompanied, and his presence was a weight, a warmth, an anchor, not to drag her down, but to remind her, you are still here. And that is enough. Each flake a brief visitor, landing silently, vanishing into the stillness of the world. She sat beside him, knees creaking quietly. To know the days were precious, because they were counted. To live inside the now so completely, that there was no room left for lack. And for a long while, they watched together. Two beings shaped by time, weathered by years, sitting in shared wonder. Not because they needed worship, but because they already carried something divine, a stillness, a sufficiency, a gaze that did not seek approval. He'd claimed it long ago as his night post. But portals to something greater. But don't rush. Let this quiet linger. Let the hush between woman and cat settle gently on your chest, like snowfall that doesn't ask to be seen. From there, he could see her rise and fall with each breath, not guarding her, just accompanying the night. It was not a house of noise, but it was not empty. Not because he needed the story, but because she liked how her voice sounded with only him listening. The words she chose were always soft ones. Photographs now kept in drawers, not to forget, but to preserve. The cat didn't answer, but his body leaned just slightly toward hers, not touching, but near enough that she could feel the warmth through the air. And somehow, that was the answer. But the cat asked for none of those things. He did not ask her to speak of them, to remember them, to cry for them. Passages from books read many times. Not for discovery, but for returning. There were the sounds of the cat's small claws clicking on the tile floor, the soft settling of his body onto a windowsill cushion. She lit a small lamp, its glow spreading like amber honey across the room. She would stop mid-sentence sometimes, when her voice caught unexpectedly. A word too tender, a name she hadn't meant to read aloud, and the cat would glance at her then, not with worry, just acknowledgement. Like he had heard it too, but chose to let it pass without needing to fix it. The kettle's hush as it cooled, the tick of the old clock that no longer kept perfect time. They didn't need music. The house already sang in its own language, the language of aging wood, sunlight passing through lace curtains, and paws brushing against linen. Sometimes in the afternoon, she would read aloud. He never looked up when she read, but his ears would tilt just slightly to catch the tone. They shared evening rituals, ones that didn't require planning. He was never underfoot, never clinging. But when the final light left the window, he would always return, pausing at the bedroom doorway, waiting for her to notice. And she always did. Sometimes she would wake briefly, not startled, but unsure of where she was in time. There had been losses, more than she had counted aloud, names she no longer said. He simply lay beside her on the days when memory swelled, when the air thickened with ghosts. One winter evening, snow began to fall in the early dark. The cat sat on the windowsill, watching the flakes drift down. She whispered, "You'll be the last companion I'll need, won't you?" They would not last forever. She knew that, and perhaps he did too. But that was not a sadness. It was a tenderness. Gentle close of segment 2, flowing to segment 3. In another life, in another land, people once built temples to beings like him. Let us travel there now, through sand and story, to the world of Bastet, where cats were not pets. Long ago, in lands brushed by desert wind and softened by the slow curve of the Nile, cats were not simply animals. They were mystery given form. Shadow and sun, woven together into a living presence that walked without noise and stared without fear. Not just of predator and prey, but of stillness and grace, instinct and restraint, the hidden and the seen. They did not beg for affection. They did not strive to entertain. They did not explain themselves. And for this, they were worshipped. In ancient Egypt, to see a cat was to be reminded of balance. She was not a queen who ruled through force. She ruled through calm, through the knowledge that nothing loud need prove its power. The goddess Bastet, lioness-turned domestic cat, stood in temples carved of stone and heat. There are papyrus scrolls with drawings of cats seated next to fish offerings. To kill a cat in ancient Egypt, even by accident, was considered a crime punishable by death. Laid them beside small amulets, carefully wrapped in linen. It wasn't about ownership in the afterlife. It was about honor. A thank you to the creature who walked beside them in life without ever clinging, without ever needing too much. A thank you for the lesson. You can be complete. You can be full. You can live in the heart of civilization and still be entirely your own. In palaces, in villages, on windowsills and rooftops, still wholly themselves. Let the silence of a temple echo within you a moment longer. And in one such palace, in a land of velvet and crystal, a princess grew old with no crown upon her head, but with one cat at her side, a cat that did not need her, and so taught her to love herself again. Not because cats were rare, but because their presence was sacred. The city would overflow with song, with scent, with lantern light floating across the river. And among it all, the cats would move calmly, not as the center of attention, but as reminders. That joy does not always dance. They walked along the riverbanks at dusk, pausing at shadows, pausing at moonlight, pausing at nothing at all. And the people watched, awed by the quiet certainty of a creature that knew its place without seeking status. That celebration can sit still. That peace does not require applause. It was not sentimentality. It was understanding. The kind that recognizes the divine in whatever does not strive. But perhaps what they received, even more than prayer or blessing, was a mirror, held in the silent eyes of a cat. A mirror that asked nothing, offered nothing, but reflected everything. A question not spoken. Can you sit beside yourself without running away? Can you look at your own hunger and not chase it? Can you love your own company without distraction? In stillness, in precision, in restraint. In the cat that does not chase every sound, but listens first and chooses when and how to act, if at all. Not lunging at the fish, not meowing, just sitting, knowing the offering was for them, but also knowing it did not define them. Her image often showed her seated, not triumphant, not grasping, just at ease. A cat in repose was not laziness. It was mastery. No tricks, no loyalty contracts, only their being. Their careful tread across kitchen floors. Their gaze resting on the reed mats as scribes wrote poems to the sun. Their stillness, which taught even priests how to wait without striving. In villages and cities from Memphis to Thebes, cats wandered freely through courtyards and chambers. Not to tame them, but to learn from them. They did not beg the gods for favor. They did not try to earn their place in the world. They simply existed, with clean lines, with unhurried movement, with a self-regard so subtle it looked like peace. How a cat could pause for a long time, staring into what seemed like nothing, and how, within that pause, there was no impatience, no apology, only presence. A presence so complete that it became a form of prayer. They were welcome in homes, in palaces, even in burial sites, not as companions, not as guardians, but as presences. They were allowed, not owned, and in return, they brought nothing extra. Egyptians watched them closely. Cats were revered not for what they did, but for what they did not need. And from this, a society began to shape its understanding of contentment. Their dignity was not tied to hunger or satisfaction. It was rooted deeper in a soul that had nothing to prove. When Egyptians buried cats, They often mummified them with care. In the temples of Bastet in Bubastis, festivals were held each year. Many came to the temple seeking answers, healing, fertility, protection from illness. The cats of Egypt did not need to be trained. They were already wise. They saw the world with uncluttered clarity. Centuries passed, temples crumbled, cities fell into sand, but the cat remained. Let us go there, but take your time. Let this sand settle. They say that cats in ancient Egypt were not just pets, nor even just symbols. They were embodiments, living expressions of a principle the Egyptians held sacred, the principle of inner harmony, of balance, of completeness without dependence. The hieroglyph for cat, Miu, was often inscribed with reverence. They were guardians, not of temples in the loud, sword-wielding sense, but guardians of thresholds, of grain against mouse, of sleep against interruption, of spirit against chaos. And what is more complete than a cat, curled in the sun, washing itself as if it were the most important thing in the world? We run from silence, as if quiet were a kind of death. Maybe you had lost someone. Maybe the Nile had not risen enough that year. Maybe your body was tired from the weight of days. And then, in the middle of the sacred hall, a cat walks past you, not rushing, not hiding, just walking, head high, tail like a slow brushstroke through time. And for a moment, you forget the ache. Because here is a creature that needs no fixing. Here is something whole. And if she can be whole, maybe you can too. Remember Bastet. Remember that sovereignty isn't loud. It's often wrapped in fur, blinking slowly, saying nothing, and knowing that's more than enough. But the Egyptian cat? She sat in silence like a queen. She basked. She cleaned herself with intention. She needed no applause. A cat sitting in a window, sun warming her back. She was weighing your soul. Like Mat, goddess of truth, who weighed hearts against feathers. Was your heart light? Unburdened by wanting, by comparison, by the hunger for things you don't understand? If so, you could pass into the next world. If not, you would wander. Perhaps that's why we feel something strange when a cat stares at us. It's not judgment, it's assessment. A quiet feline honesty. Are you full inside, or are you still searching? The world is full of headlines and notifications, but she doesn't know. And she is not diminished by not knowing, because peace is not found in knowing everything. Not the statues, the living ones. They walked beside royalty. They slept beside grain stores. They watched the stars from rooftops of mud and gold. And through it all, they did not change who they were to fit the moment. They were always themselves, elegant in chaos, poised in plenty, present in absence. It is found in needing less. But the ability to sit alone quietly, without reaching for anything, and still feel like something precious. Like a cat basking in the sun who knows the sun doesn't shine for her, but shines nonetheless. And that is enough. And in doing so, she taught those who watched her, taught without teaching, revealed without explaining. Bastet, the lioness turned house cat, began as a fierce protector. But over time, she became the goddess of soft things. Home, pleasure, music, protection that doesn't shout. You imagine walking through one of her temples now. Columns rising like giant reeds. The hush of linen robes brushing against sandstone floors. And cats, real cats, woven into the life of the sacred space. Not trained, not ordered, just there. allowed to climb altars, to nap in sunlit corners, honored not because they did something heroic, but because they were something essential. Her statues were made with curves, not claws. She carried a sistrum, not a sword, and her temples smelled of lotus and almond oil, not ash. One inscription reads, "The cat lies in the shadow of the god and becomes the shadow of the god." Not a servant, not a worshipper, a shadow, which is to say, one who moves in alignment, without effort, without resistance. People brought her offerings not out of fear, but in gratitude, because she represented what we all secretly wish for, to feel complete, at ease, sovereign in our own skin, because the people could see in them a living metaphor for how the soul should feel. How different this is from how we usually see ourselves. We build identities from noise. We mistake movement for meaning. You wonder what it must have felt like to be an ancient person with a heavy heart, wandering through a temple in the midday heat. You don't need to be from Egypt to understand this. You've seen it before. The Egyptians believed that when a cat looked at you, truly looked, she wasn't just seeing you. Back in the present, you find yourself thinking of those temple cats. And maybe that's what self-love looks like. Not mirror affirmations, not lists of achievements. So the next time you see a cat stretch with that slow, spiraled grace, or sit unmoving for an hour watching a beam of light shift across the floor, remember the temples. Now, let us follow a final cat, a feline companion to a girl born in a palace, who was taught love by a creature who never needed her at all. Thank you. And so the priests of Bastet, who walked barefoot through shadowed temple corridors, spoke little of possession. They spoke instead of alignment, of being where one was meant to be, of doing only what must be done, with grace and nothing extra. The cats didn't pray. They didn't bow. They didn't burn incense. They were the prayer, just in how they walked, how they paused, how they blinked with the whole sun behind their eyes, and never once asked it to shine brighter. When people came to the temple with grief, a lost child, a failed harvest, an aching limb, they often found no immediate answers. But they found cats, one by the water basin, one tucked inside a woven basket behind the altar. They would cry. They would tell the stillness all their sorrows. One curled on the lap of a sleeping stone statue. They were principles, living ideas, symbols of Ma'at, the balance between chaos and order. The people would sit. The cats never stirred. They offered no comfort in the way humans expected. No lean in, no purr, no glance. Yet when those people rose to leave, they often found themselves lighter, as if something had been heard not with ears, but with presence. In that land of sand and sky, cats were not pets. To kill a cat was unthinkable, not only because of law, but because it would be like extinguishing a living flame, like breaking harmony itself. Even in death, they were honored, wrapped in linen, buried with fish-shaped amulets and palm milk offerings, mourned with ceremony deeper than words. Why? To love without wrapping, to sit beside someone in pain without taking it into yourself. They do not absorb your grief. When a child was ill, a cat might curl beside them, unconcerned but present. Because the Egyptians understood, a cat who has mastered herself has nothing to give away and nothing to lose. Some historians try to explain this reverence. They talk of grain silos and rat control, of economy and pestilence, of agriculture's need for balance. Not affection, not healing, but company without entanglement. But the true reasons cannot be counted. They must be felt. When a woman's heart was heavy, she would find a cat and simply sit. That was enough. This, perhaps, is the most sacred thing cats know, to be with another without reaching toward them. They do not mirror your brokenness. Instead, they radiate quiet until your grief remembers its shape and melts into something softer. This is not detachment. It's the kind of presence that trusts the other to be whole again, not by force, not by fixing, but by not interfering, because a cat would never stay in a space that was unbalanced. And so the gods smiled on cats, because while humans wrote scriptures and sang hymns and built monuments to reach the heavens, cats simply lived and became one with the divine through being. No striving, no seeking, just an inner silence so complete that the gods could rest inside it. Perhaps this is why cats do not get lonely the way we do, not because they don't long, but because they don't imagine they're incomplete. They can sit by the window, watching nothing for hours, and feel full. They can sleep alone, wander alone, return alone, and not once feel abandoned. Not because they've closed their hearts, but because their hearts were never tangled in needing to be filled. The ancient ones understood this. They built their temples in symmetry, not only for the gods, but for the cats who walked their walls. Even now, thousands of years later, if you walk the ruins of Bubastis at sunrise, you might find paw prints in the dust, left not in haste, but in rhythm. A memory of a being who carried the universe on 4 silent paws and never once lost her balance. Perhaps this is why, when you look into a cat's eyes, you see not just a burning sun, but the steady ground beneath it. A reminder that sometimes to be truly free, you don't need to chase the light. You just need to curl into yourself, like the cats of old, and listen for the silence that has always loved you. Do you know why the cats of ancient Egypt were always alone? They didn't need anyone. They say the cats knew which rooms held sorrow, and which ones simply echoed with silence. They didn't need to ask. They felt it in the floor, in the places where the sand settled heavier. A quiet tail curled beside a cracked pillar, a slow breath near a forgotten offering bowl. Eyes half closed, not in dismissal, but in deep acceptance. In the way, the sunlight didn't quite touch the stone. And when they found those places, they didn't flee. They didn't fix. They simply stayed. They feared omens. They read stars and stumbled over signs. They whispered of famine, rebellion, misfortune. There was no rush to cleanse the sorrow, no desire to make the room cheerful. They did not ask the gods for clarity, because they were clarity. Clear in their hunger, clear in their rest, clear in the invisible pulse they followed like a compass that never broke. Some had cats entombed beside them, not out of ownership, but to ensure their journey into the afterlife was walked in balance. Just presence, the kind that allows pain to stop screaming because it finally feels seen. Not just ghosts or spirits, but the truth behind things, the quiet weight of a lie, the flicker of restlessness under a smile, the kind that humans stumble in, the invisible shape of fear behind a polished throne. They do not ask whether they are loved. They do not adjust themselves to make you stay. They offer their back as a bridge between what is heavy and what is light. They offer their company as a gift, not as a negotiation. They are not halves to a whole. They are wholeness itself, inviting us silently to return to our own. But because you've remembered your own flame, even the priests, those solemn caretakers of divine order, sometimes lost themselves in worry. Do not imagine she is missing something. She is more complete than you have ever felt. The same pause before the leap. The same knowing blink, as if to say, I am enough, and so are you. You've simply forgotten. And then they close their eyes, not to sleep, but to remember. Still, in modern rooms with soft rugs and humming machines, cats curl into themselves and unknowingly mirror the wisdom of their ancestors. It was said that if you listened closely, you could hear the gods sigh in relief, for only in the company of cats did they find a stillness worthy of resting in. She is not longing. She is not empty. She is simply with herself. And that, to her, is everything. But the cats, they stretched in sunbeams without questioning the sky. They chased dust motes in empty sanctuaries, as if joy were a natural consequence of being alive. You see, cats live without apology, not rudely, not arrogantly, but wholly. A kind of invisible perimeter was drawn, not out of fear, but respect. They do not beg for connection, because they are connection with earth, with breath, with the moment as it is. And in ancient Egypt, that gift was sacred. So sacred that people would leave rooms undisturbed if a cat had chosen to sleep there. At night, when the desert wind carried the voices of distant jackals, and oil lamps burned low beside scrolls of prayer, the cats would move through the corridors like dusk itself, because the presence of a cat meant that something about the space was finally balanced, soundless, slow, certain. Even the pharaohs, those crowned sons of the earth, bowed to the mystery of cats, because a cat sees what we cannot, and yet they do not judge. They observe. They wait. There is a reason their eyes are slivered moons. They see in darkness, not just the physical dark, but the emotional kind, the spiritual kind. Cats do not rush to light candles. They sit with you in the dark until you remember you are not afraid. And then maybe they leave, not out of coldness. And that's all they ever wanted. So when you find a cat sitting alone in a quiet room, do not feel sorry for her. She is not waiting. That is what the ancients knew, and what we are only just remembering. Cats are not companions in the way we understand. They do not suffer from loneliness because they do not suffer from the illusion of lack. And so the temples crumble, but the mystery remains. The same curve of the spine. This is the story of a princess and her cat who needed no crown. The palace was made of stone and silence. Even the laughter of servants was hushed by the velvet corridors. Even joy had to ask permission to echo. She was a princess, not yet crowned, not yet wed, but already pressed into the mold of what she was supposed to become. A vessel for alliances, a face for the people, a name for a dynasty. And though her robes shimmered in sunlight and her tutors praised her cleverness, she often woke in the night feeling like a hollow bell, beautiful, but rung by someone else's hand. She first noticed the cat when she was 11, not because the cat approached her, but because it didn't. It lounged beneath the jasmine vine that twisted up the southern wall of the courtyard. But you don't need to disappear. She smiled. She bowed. She accepted. But in the end, she always returned to the cat and to herself. And somehow that was enough to keep her spine straight. It stretched as if to say, yes, that's how freedom sounds. Even people, maids, cooks, scribes, had their roles memorized so deeply that they no longer flinched when called by number instead of name, but of what she already was, whole, without permission, without applause. It ignored the horns of parade. It walked away when called, unless, of course, it felt like coming. It's something you recognize when it doesn't want to shape you. Until she looked down and saw the cat curled in a sunbeam, utterly alone, and yet more at peace than any human she had ever known. She turned to the suitor and said gently, "I am not afraid of being alone. I am afraid of being with someone who needs me to be someone else." And she sensed deeply that to own this creature was to dishonor it. Instead, she gave it a place. A pillow left near the window, a bowl of fresh goat's milk by the stairs, a small string of blue beads tied to the garden gate so the cat could knock it when it wished to be let in. And in return, the cat gave her nothing and yet everything. And the cat remained by her side, never asking for anything, never needing to be noticed, just being. Her face appeared on coins. People called her wise and just. But her greatest teacher remained the cat who taught her how to sit with herself without judgment, who reminded her, day after day, you do not need a crown to be complete. You need presence, you need quiet, you need truth. And that taught her more than any priest, any tutor, any mother ever could. A whisper in stone. The cat was never hers, but it helped her become herself. And in the end, that was more precious than any kingdom. The princes envied that and loved it, but it sat near her, especially when she wasn't pretending to be someone, not the poised princess, not the scholar, just the quiet girl who picked pomegranate seeds alone in the sun, the one who sometimes cried for no reason, the one who didn't always know what she was feeling. To that girl the cat came. It blinked slowly when the princess passed by. It neither bowed nor fled. It offered no performance. That alone made it sacred to her. Most creatures in the palace had been trained. The birds in the aviary knew songs on cue. The dogs learned to sit with military grace. But the cat was unbothered. It drank from the royal fountain without asking. It lay on royal scrolls as if paper were sun-warmed stone. She didn't give the cat a name. That would have made it hers. It never sat on her lap. When the court tried to fit her into expectations, the cat would glance at her, unimpressed, as if to say, they might need you to perform. As years passed, the suitors arrived. They brought gifts, peacocks in gold cages, poems inked on silk, necklaces shaped like stars. Because the cat reminded her, love isn't something you earn. One suitor said, I will make you my queen, and you'll never be alone again. And for a moment, she almost said yes. The court was shocked, but the cat was not. It blinked. It yawned. She grew older, not bitter, but sovereign, not guarded, but rooted. Because in the cat's quiet confidence, she saw a mirror, not of what she had to become. In time, the kingdom changed. So did she? Her name was etched in history. And now as the night settles over the palace, the echoes of that life still linger, not in the throne room, not in the records, but in the soft indent of a pillow near the window, in a sunlit patch of marble that no one steps on, in a garden gate that still bears a string of blue beads, gently swaying with the breeze. Once upon a time, there was a princess who loved the cat very much. And the next morning, the castle grounds stirred with the muted hush of a royal dawn servant's whispering, lanterns dimming, the dew still undecided between cloud and earth. The princess awoke with the cat curled beside her, not in the crook of her arm, but at the edge of the cushion. Then she walked to the window, not waiting for her human. The princess followed, barefoot, feeling the coolness of the marble wake her body. She watched the cat leap onto the sill, tail flicking like a quiet metronome. They shared a warmth, but no weight, no clinging. The cat stretched before standing, a silent yawn pressing through her whiskers. They passed the stone fountains with no wish to make wishes. She stopped counting compliments like coins. She stopped measuring her worth in how others responded to her beauty, her words, or her usefulness. She let meals grow cold while she listened to the birds. She wore her hair loose, not for allure, but because it felt like wind when it moved. And one day she realized the ache of loneliness had been replaced, not by companionship, not by distraction, but by something quieter, a sense that nothing was missing, that even her aloneness was full of life, that she could sit with herself and not be hollow. Instead, she started watching how the cat drank water slowly, reverently, as if every drop were a miracle. She watched how the cat refused to be rushed, even when the bell rang for supper. She saw how the cat walked away, not in offense, but because she chose silence over noise, stillness over attention, solitude over praise. They passed the lily ponds with no desire to stir their glass-like stillness. And the princess noticed that the cat never chased birds, never pawed at fish, never reached for what was not hers, and said softly, "I used to believe love was about being needed." The cat yawned. "I think now, love might just be the absence of hunger, the place where nothing must be filled." The cat blinked and rested her head on her paws. The princess smiled. No reply was needed. It wasn't disinterest. It was self-containment. She didn't need to touch beauty to possess it. She didn't need to grasp wonder to feel it. She had her body, her breath, the sky. That was enough. Beyond the window, the morning was painting its first strokes across the hills, mist rising from grass, soft gold spilling over tiled roofs, the chirping of distant doves sounding like questions never in need of answers. "Where do you go when you leave me?" The princess asked aloud, not expecting a reply. The cat blinked slowly. That feline punctuation again. "Or maybe," the princess added after a pause, "you never leave me. Maybe it's me who forgets where I am. You must marry wisely. A princess is never alone, only observed. Even your silence should serve a purpose." But none of them had taught her the stillness the cat carried like a second skin. The cat remained still. The princess had once been surrounded by tutors, advisors, caretakers, people whose lives orbited hers, always offering opinions cloaked as wisdom. The cat had stopped mid-groom, turned her gaze directly toward the girl, and simply looked, not disapproving, not curious, just present. In that moment, the princess had felt more seen than in all the flurry of court announcements and birthday speeches. Seen not as a duty or a daughter, but as something alive, full and enough. She remembered once, as a child, holding her breath while hiding in the library alcove, watching the royal feline clean herself with such unhurried certainty. Now grown, she walked with the cat through the palace gardens. And so the princess stopped asking herself whether she was enough. The princess began to mimic the cat, not in play, but in spirit. She sat in gardens without books. Late one night, as rain whispered down the columns of the terrace, the princess turned to the cat. Once upon a time, there was a princess who lived in a great castle with high towers and thick stone walls. She had everything the world could offer: riches, respect, and endless, empty rooms. But the one thing she didn't have was peace. The princess began to notice how the world softened when she no longer reached for it. The moon didn't shine any less brightly when she stopped making wishes to it. The stars still came, quietly and faithfully, without needing her dreams to pull them forth. And the wind didn't ask to be chased. It simply arrived and moved through her open window, brushing her skin like a long-lost memory. She threw lavish parties, seeking laughter and connection, but found only gossip and pretense. In this state of quiet companionship, the cat was always nearby, not clinging, never needing to be summoned, lavishly dressed, lips perfumed with ambition, trailing a silken cat of her own, a fragile thing, adorned with jeweled collars and anxious eyes. Don't you get lonely in all this quiet? No. I think solitude becomes sacred only when we stop using it to prepare for someone else as a rival. She simply existed like the flame, unbothered if noticed, undiminished if ignored. When we stop waiting to be seen and start looking, not outward, but inward. It's the noise that once made me lonely, and yet always there, like a punctuation mark that only appeared at the end of thoughts that truly mattered. It had become a daily practice not for decoration, but for the simple pleasure of feeling things with her hands, of noticing textures and scents without needing to turn them into gifts or garlands. She still washed behind her ears with elegance, still padded through the palace like it was her birthright. The gesture was not an invitation. It was simply truth. Through seasons and leaves and the gentle sigh of aging, the princess grew older, but never bitter. The princess sat with her for hours saying nothing, offering no tears. And who left behind not grief, but peace? Because that is what self-love leaves behind when it departs. Not absence, but a fullness that cannot be taken. One afternoon, the princess sat cross-legged in the garden courtyard, weaving together strands of lavender, rosemary, and wild mint. But now I see there's a peace in being deeply known by few. The cat lay sprawled across a patch of sunlit stone, belly exposed in the most vulnerable of gestures, but no one dared to touch. Not as a pet, not as a symbol, but as a presence, so that I could learn to never need approval to exist. And the cat's body stilled, soft as dusk, a presence that reminded her there had never been anything missing. The princess whispered, "I used to think the goal was to be loved by many." The way she greeted the moon like an old friend, not a distant hope. The way she no longer explained her silences. She ran her fingers across the lavender stems. Later that day, a visiting noblewoman came to court. She caught sight of the princess in the garden dirt under her fingernails, hair swept back with a piece of ribbon, a cat sleeping at her feet like a goddess disguised in fur. "You've grown strange," the noblewoman said with a smile too sweet to trust. The princess answered with a voice not loud, but steady. Later that night, she wrote in her journal by candlelight. The cat curled beside her, tail tucked neatly. She never meowed for attention, never needed the light. Time passed the way it always does when we stop counting it. And the cat aged too gracefully, with fewer leaps, but no loss of dignity. Some nights, when the princess sat in front of the mirror, she would catch the cat's reflection beside her. On the cat's final day, she lay in the sun beneath the olive tree in the inner courtyard, where the stones stayed warm even into autumn. Not because she didn't feel the loss, but because she understood. You do not mourn what never tried to possess you. You honor it. When the last breath came, the princess whispered, "Thank you for never needing me." From that day forward, the princess walked differently. not as someone waiting to be chosen, but as someone who had already chosen herself. The courtiers whispered that she had become more beautiful with age, though no one could say why. It was in the way she sat alone without discomfort. And somewhere, if silence can have a shape, there remains the memory of a cat who lived without reaching, who loved without needing. Some cats choose gardens. Some choose sunlit porches, or the curve of an old woman's lap. And some, though fewer, choose silence so deep it echoes. This is the story of a cat who chose empty houses. While other cats sought homes with warmth and motion, this cat preferred spaces left behind, half forgotten, door hinges soft with rust, windows still blinking in the sun. Where others smelled dust, she smelled stories. And above all, she understood something most beings never learn. There is a stillness in what's been let go. And some souls need that stillness more than company. Not once or twice, but again and again, across many years and abandoned places. She bore no caller, no name, no chip in her ear. But wherever a house stood long enough without a heartbeat, she would appear. And with her came quiet, not the kind that feels empty, but the kind that fills everything. She was not a ghost, but she was a keeper of ghosts. Where humans saw desolation, she saw rest. She came to the places most souls avoid, and brought with her a quiet that made sorrow bearable. An old woman answered, because that's where love goes when no one's left to carry it. She keeps it from being lost. The child didn't understand fully, but she nodded. And that night, she drew a picture of the cat alone on a window sill, watching stars. She left it at the doorstep of an old home everyone had forgotten, and somehow the next day, it was gone. She rested on the beds no longer slept in. She sat beside the photographs, long untouched. But to those who'd been hollowed by loss, her presence was a balm, because she brought no demand, only the message, you do not need to be filled to be whole. And she watched the moonlight pour through windows no one had washed in decades. She walked through broken doorways as if entering temples. And she reminded people, sometimes the most sacred places are the ones where no one else dares to go. And sometimes, she would purr, softly, like an echo of something worth remembering. The first house she ever chose had once belonged to a woodcarver. She simply listened to the sigh of the floorboards, the soft click of cooling walls, the memory of boots no longer walking. He inherited his grandmother's cottage, but hadn't dared enter it in 20 years. Too many memories, too much shame. But when he finally did, he found her there, the cat sleeping in his grandmother's favorite chair, as if the space had never been abandoned, as if love had quietly continued in his absence. In the hush of absence, she grew whole. He had died alone in winter, and no one came back after the snow. Grief became gentler. Regret became breathing. He left the door open after that. He didn't say she was his, but he started leaving out a saucer of milk. The firewood had long run out, but the scent of cedar still lived in the beams. In the evenings, the cat would curl inside the hearth, not to be warm, but because it remembered warmth. She never cried. She never waited at the door. They called her the silence cat in a nearby village. No one knew where she came from. One spring, a traveler returned to the village, a middle-aged man with weathered boots and guilt in his spine. He didn't cry right away, but he did sit down beside her. And in the presence of the cat, the silence softened. The cat never stayed forever. She wasn't a pet nor a resident. She was a bridge. In one town, a child once asked, "Why does she live where no one else wants to?" The cat never needed a crowd to feel real. She never meowed for attention. She didn't charm or entertain. She slept in ruins the way others sleep in palaces. She once lived for 7 years in a yellow house at the edge of a flooded valley. The people had all gone. Only their walls remained. Sometimes the rain would rise high enough to kiss the window panes. Sometimes mist would curl in and drift through. The hallway like a forgotten breath. That house had belonged to a woman who had grown orchids in blue teacups. Even when the floors had warped and the ceiling gave in, the orchids bloomed one last time, as if remembering the hands that had once loved them, and the cat she slept beside those teacups, not for beauty, not for drama, but because no one else would, because stillness is sacred when it has been abandoned by all else. A letter was found one day beneath a cracked floor tile, addressed to no one. It read, "If anyone ever returns here, know that I tried to leave this house kindly. I cleaned what I could. I kissed the walls goodbye. I whispered thank you to the sink. I hope something gentle stays, even when I'm gone." The cat never read the letter, of course, but perhaps she felt it. Perhaps that's why she stayed for months afterward, curling on the dust-softened couch, blinking at the sun like it was an old friend, because that's what she was to these places. The one who stayed long enough to say goodbye. In another village, there was an inn that had once been full of laughter. After the owner passed, it became nothing more than timber and echo. But for the cat, it became her theater of memory. At night, she'd walk the creaking hallways as though guests still whispered behind the doors. She'd sit on the bar counter where glasses no longer clinked. She'd curl by the fire that hadn't been lit in 10 winters. The people who passed by said she looked like she remembered something they didn't. Maybe she did, or maybe she was simply reflecting their unspoken longing. The cat who slept in empty houses was never photographed. She never became a village mascot, nor a symbol. She slipped through fences and curtains like fog, and never stayed long enough for fame. But in every place she visited, someone healed. Not always in dramatic ways. Sometimes just enough to sigh differently. Sometimes enough to dust a frame or speak aloud to a room. She carried no miracles. Only presence. And presence, when quiet enough, becomes a balm. Once she entered a house that had been locked for 40 years. The key had rusted, but the window hadn't. Inside lived a forgotten piano, its ivory teeth yellowed with time. No one had played it since the girl who once lived there fell silent. The cat did not play music, but she lay beneath it as if waiting for sound to return. She stayed there for weeks. And in those weeks, a neighbor walked past each day, listening, not for music, but for the hush that comes before memory. Then, one morning, the neighbor brought oil for the hinges. And by evening, the piano lid had been opened. The cat was gone, but the silence she left behind had changed. It was no longer the silence of grief. It was the silence of someone beginning to remember how to open a window. No one knew what nourished her. She never begged. She never hunted. Yet she was never thin, never ragged. It was said that stillness fed her, that the breath of old places became milk to her bones, that grief itself, once softened, turned to warmth in her belly. Others claimed she was a spirit, but the truth was simpler. She had learned, in her quiet velvet way, that what the world calls emptiness is not always empty. So she wandered, from place to place, from loss to loss, not to fix, but to witness. Because sometimes healing begins not with touch, but with being seen gently, silently, without expectation. She once stayed a winter in a church that no one entered anymore. Snow gathered in pews. Icicles hung from hymnals. And she walked the aisle as if following an invisible procession. She curled beneath the altar. She slept beside the unlit candles. And every morning, the sun passed through the stained glass just long enough to paint her in colors too beautiful to name. A man who had stopped believing came in once to escape the wind. He sat on the broken bench and stared at her for a long while. When he left behind his scarf. When he returned a week later, the scarf was still there. So was she. The next week, he brought candles. He didn't pray, but he lit them anyway. Not for salvation, just for warmth. The cat did not belong to these people. She belonged to what remained after they had gone. She belonged to the echo in stairwells, to the blanket left folded on the foot of a bed, to the hollow in the wall where a clock used to tick. She belonged to the spaces no one claimed, because in those spaces she could rest without being needed. And that, perhaps, is the rarest freedom. A child once followed her from the edge of a town. He'd seen her slip through the gate of an old greenhouse, now overrun with ivy. Inside, she walked with care, her tail flicking against broken pots and glass. The boy whispered, "Why do you go where no one else does?" He thought she didn't hear, but she paused, just briefly, beside a fallen vine. She looked back at him, and in her gaze, there was no answer. Only acceptance, and somehow that was enough. He never followed her again. But from that day on, he left. A small bowl by the fence, not to tame her, just in case she needed it. People often think loneliness is loud, but the cat knew otherwise. She knew loneliness could be quiet. So quiet, it forgot its own name. That's why she went to the empty houses, not because they called her, but because they didn't know how to call anymore. And she went because even silence needs to be heard. She never stayed forever, only until the silence softened, only until the house could breathe again without aching. Then she would slip out between seasons without sound, and the home would remain, not healed, not full, but no longer waiting, no longer hollow, simply still. She never left paw prints behind, at least none that stayed. Those who swore they'd seen her often found no proof the next day. Not a tuft of fur, not a scratch on the door, not even a scent. Just a lingering hush in the room where she had curled. A hush like held breath, like something once grieving had, for a moment, let go. Some said she was an omen. Some said she was an angel. But most never said anything, only watched her from windows, wondering why the quiet around her felt so peaceful. Because that was her gift. She never chased loneliness away. She sat beside it. And by sitting there, she showed it was survivable. There was a man who had lost his wife. He hadn't spoken to anyone in years, not because he couldn't, but because everything he said tasted like ashes. His house was filled with silence as he couldn't enter. The kitchen still smelled like her ginger tea. The bedroom still held the echo of her breath before she passed. But one evening, he heard a soft sound. Not a knock, not a voice, just the faintest shift of weight on the WINDOWS ILL Dot. He looked up Dot, and there she was, the cat, sitting, still as a statue, watching him. He didn't open the window. He didn't need to. She stayed until dawn. And when he finally fell asleep in his chair, tears dried on his cheek. The cat blinked slowly, as if to say, "You made it through the night." That was all. She didn't return. She didn't have to. The next day, he opened a drawer he hadn't dared to touch in 5 years. He found her letters. He read every one. Another time, a child ran away. The world had grown too loud. At school, they said he was too quiet, too strange. At home, no one noticed he'd stopped talking. He found a crumbling house in the woods and made it his refuge. No one had lived there for decades, yet something in the way the light filtered through broken shutters made it feel alive. He lay down on a sagging mattress and cried without a sound. That's when she appeared. The cat. She said nothing, of course. She didn't. She simply lay beside him, her warmth a presence more comforting than any word. He didn't pet her. He barely breathed. But when he finally slept, he dreamed for the first time in months. Dot in the Avat. Dream. He was not wrong. He was not broken. He was not too quiet. He was just there, and the world didn't flinch. When he woke, the cat was gone, but she had left a single whisker, curled beneath his hand like a ribbon of moonlight. Dot. He kept it in a matchbox for years. What did she eat? Where did she go? No one knew. Some said she belonged to no time, that she moved between decades like shadows across water, that she was born of grief, but not made by it, that she was what grief becomes when it chooses to rest. Dot. Once, a demolition crew came to flatten an old estate. The house had been empty for so long, even the wallpaper had begun to fall like petals. The workers found the cat asleep on the second floor. They paused. They waited. They came back an hour later, and she was gone. But the lead foreman, who hadn't cried in decades, felt something in his chest loosen. He ordered the crew to stop. They didn't touch the house. No one could explain why. But it stood for 10 more years, covered in ivy, until a family of owls moved in. The town began to call it the Gentle House. Children left drawings at the gate. The local florist sometimes tied ribbons to the fence. No one claimed ownership. No one needed to. She wasn't trying to teach anything. She wasn't healing people on purpose. But in her quiet presence, people remembered that solitude was not the same as abandonment. That emptiness could be soft. That absence could still cradle. That loneliness, when honored gently, turns into peace. One night, it snowed for the first time in years. The town fell silent beneath the weight of white. Lights dimmed early. Even the birds stopped singing. That was the night every abandoned house seemed to glow. People swore. They saw flickers, brief glimmers in windows where no one lived. Shapes like feline shadows stretching beneath doors. A curl of fur against frosted glass. They said she was everywhere and nowhere. The next morning, footprints appeared in the snow outside 12 houses. 12. One for each person in town who had quietly suffered loss. Some left bowls of milk on their steps. Some whispered, "Thank you," to the empty air. One woman, elderly and mostly blind, stood at her window and said, "She reminded me how to be alone without being afraid." Eventually, the stories faded. New cats came. New people moved in. The world changed, as it always does. But the feeling stayed. In certain rooms, when the light hits just right. or in the hush before a storm, or when you lie down in a place no one has touched in years and feel somehow welcomed. She's still there, Dot, in the silence, in the pause between thoughts, in the way your chest softens when you finally stop, trying to explain your sadness. Cats aren't lonely, Dot. They simply are. They sit beside silence without trying to fix it. They walk through empty halls without asking to be filled. They sleep in the ruins and remind us you are not broken for needing space. You are not lesser for loving the quiet. You are not lacking just because you are alone. You are whole, even here. The cat didn't remember how she first found the temple. Perhaps it was a scent carried by wind. Perhaps it was the hum of stillness that cats hear the way humans hear bells. But one dusk, when the light was gold and fading, she arrived. A vast stone courtyard, an old temple wrapped in ivy, and in the center a statue as tall as trees. Dot. It was a statue of a sitting monk. Not stern, not radiant, just quiet. Eyes closed, palms together, mouth curved in the gentlest trace of a smile. He was carved from mountain stone, worn smooth by centuries of rain and reverence. People no longer came to this place, but birds did, and moss. And the cat, she circled once, slow as ritual, then climbed Dot first the folded feet, cool and wide, then the crossed knees, where lichens whispered secrets. And finally, the shoulder sun warmed and steady, like a ledge built just for her. There she curled. And for the first time in her life, she did not feel small. Dot at first. She stayed a night, then two, then a season. She never left the statue. Not because she was guarding it, not because she claimed it, but because it never asked her to be anything. Dot, it didn't tell her to move. It didn't ask for purring or performance. It didn't even open its eyes. Yet in its stillness, she felt seen. Dot from her perch. She watched the world without needing to enter it. Clouds made shadow plays across the mountains. Winds brushed past her fur without disturbing her breath. Even rain felt ceremonial, each drop a small bow upon stone and spine. She was not waiting for anything. Not food, nor affection, nor revelation. She was simply becoming lighter, like her thoughts were feathers, like her heartbeat was no longer clinging to noise. And then came the pilgrims. Not many, just a few each month. People lost in their own silence. They would arrive burdened by grief, by confusion, by the heavy hum of questions with no mouths to ask them. And they would find her, this small cat on the shoulder of stone. Dot at first. They thought she was part of the statue, some clever carving, an artisan's hidden offering. But then she would move only slightly. A blink, a stretch, a slow gaze that didn't judge. And they would cry, not because of her, but because she made no demand for healing, no prescription, no doctrine. Dot. She simply was. And so, in her company, they felt just for a moment that being was enough. She never came down for them. She didn't need to, but she began to notice. Some would sit below for hours. One girl returned with a small blanket, which she left folded near the statue's base. That old man came once a week to sweep fallen leaves, though no one asked him. Dot. And sometimes, when the moon was full and round like a drum, someone would sing, not loudly, not for others to hear, just a few notes, as if speaking to something that finally listened. Dot. And then one day, a question came, not from a person, but from within. Dot. It was soft as a breeze across stone. Why are you not lonely? The cat blinked Dot not, because she didn't understand, but because she did. Loneliness had once followed her like a shadow, in alleyways, in half-empty bowls, in the spaces between humans who talked but didn't look. But here, on the shoulder of a statue that never moved, she had become weightless. Dot. She no longer clung to the need to be understood. She no longer waited to be touched. Dot. She had discovered what most beings never dare to. That solitude, when met without fear, becomes sanctuary. There was a story carved into the base of the statue. Worn with age, almost unreadable. Dot. It spoke of a monk who sat for 100 years to soften the anger in the world. He took on silence like others take on armor. And over time, his silence became compassion. The cat didn't read it, but perhaps she knew it, for one morning she stretched, turned slowly, and without sound descended, not because she was finished, but because she had heard the wind shift. A new empty place was calling, and some silences are meant to be shared. Dot. Later that month, the villagers found a kitten curled on the shoulder of the statue. Not her, but young, still, and breathing with the same calm rhythm. And so the cycle continued. Stone, cat, stillness. Each carrying the others, each teaching the rest of us something we keep forgetting. You don't have to be loud to be whole. You don't have to be seen to be real. You don't have to be loved to be enough. You only need to sit beside something sacred until you remember that you are too. There once was a kingdom that no longer needed a king. The palace still stood proud and tall atop its hill, but its golden banners had long stopped flying. The banquet halls were cold. The grand mirrors had gathered dust. The throne, once polished daily by trembling hands, now sat in silence, untouched, unclaimed. But in that silence, something small stirred. A single cat, not royal by blood, nor ceremonial by purpose. Just a cat. Gray, like mist over morning stone. Silent, like thought before a prayer. And every night, while the world forgot the throne, she remembered it in the way only a creature with no ambition could. She came not for the throne's power, but for the space beneath it. It was a strange little hollow, warm in winter, shaded in summer, lined with velvet that had once known the weight of crowns. While others had bowed to the seat above, she bowed to the stillness below. No guard stood watch. No courtiers whispered. Only her breath, slow and steady, curled against marble feet. Carved long ago, she made no ceremony of it. She did not climb. She curled. She belonged not by decree, but by peace. In the court of absence, she was queen of nothing, and it was everything. Once, a young scribe wandered into the empty palace, looking for forgotten scrolls. He found her, their eyes half-lidded, tucked. In the hush beneath the old throne, he sat down beside her, not daring to touch. He whispered, "Do you remember the kings?" She blinked slowly, then turned her face toward the shafts of light breaking through broken windows. It was not an answer, but it was something better, an invitation to sit in silence. And for the first time, the scribe didn't write. He listened to the echo of footfalls long gone, to the memory of trumpets that no longer sounded, to the heartbeat of a throne that no longer ruled but still remembered. They say every kingdom leaves behind a spirit. Some say it's a ghost. Others say it's a dream. But here, it was a cat. She kept no order, passed no law, and sought no crown. And yet, every being who stumbled into the hollow palace would pause at her feet. because she reminded them of something no rule ever could, that peace does not come from ruling others, only from sitting still within oneself. As seasons passed, ivy grew around the palace gates, birdsong became the new anthem, and the throne abandoned by men was held gently by time. But beneath it, the cat remained. She never grew old, or if she did, no one noticed. She simply remained, as though the stone remembered her weight, and the silence welcomed her presence. One day, a child came. She didn't speak. She only carried a toy crown made of daisies, wilting slightly in the sun. She knelt before the throne, not out of reverence, but curiosity. The cat stretched, then rose, circling the child once before curling again beneath the throne. The girl sat cross-legged beside her, then placed the daisy crown not on her own head, nor on the throne's arms, but beside the cat. A gift. A moment that the cat did not react. But for a second, the room felt less forgotten, not restored, not resurrected, just felt. That evening, the child told her father, "There's a cat who watches the throne. She doesn't need a king. She just keeps the quiet alive." Her father smiled. "You mean she guards it?" The child shook her head. "No, she loves it. There are places in the world that still remember glory. But this palace remembered humility. It remembered that once, long ago, a great king gave his crown to the wind. He stepped down not in shame, but in stillness. And in his absence, the throne stayed empty, waiting, not for power, but for peace. And so the cat came, not to rule, not to fill a void, but to bear witness. He arrived on a blue dusk, barefoot, with a harp too fine for his frayed clothes. No one had called for him. No festival banners had summoned songs. But something about the silence of the hill, the forgotten shape of the palace, and the distant hush that seemed to rise from the stones themselves pulled him forward. He had wandered far, played for cities and queens, coins and bread. But lately, music had turned heavy in his hands. Every melody felt rehearsed, every applause a transaction. And so he came to play where no one listened. He stepped into the throne hall and saw her. The cat, unmoved, coiled like smoke beneath the empty seat of power. She did not lift her head, only opened one eye. That was enough. The musician sat on the steps leading to the throne. He tuned his harp, not for perfection, but for presence, and he began to play. The notes didn't rise. They fell like soft leaves drifting down an unseen well. There was no grandeur, no spectacle, only a slow unwinding. His fingers moved like someone undoing a knot inside the soul. And the cat listened. For the first time in years, the musician cried while playing, not because he was sad, but because he was heard not by ears, but by space itself. The throne room, long emptied of ambition, became a cup, and into that cup he poured every note he had left. When he finished, the cat was asleep again. So he left his harp leaning against the column beside the throne. He would never touch it again. Some music, once offered into silence, does not return. The ghost of the prince at the far edge of midnight. A wind passed through the hall, and with it, a shimmer. A boy barely older than youth, yet wearing robes too grand for childhood, appeared beside the throne. His feet made no sound. His face held no fear, only longing, like fog caught in the shape of a memory. The cat opened her eyes. She did not bristle, did not run. She simply rose, walked to him, and sat at his feet. The boy knelt. "I wasn't meant to rule," he said, "but everyone told me I had to." He looked up at the throne, then down at the cat. "I didn't want a kingdom. I wanted a treehouse, a friend, a life with no mirrors." The cat purred once, then curled beside his folded legs. "I never got to tell anyone," he whispered, "that I was scared." The hall made no reply, only soft echoes of breath. He closed his eyes, and for a moment the ghost rested. Asterisk, it is said that the greatest mind of the eastern provinces once climbed the hill. He had read all the sacred scrolls, taught at the grand hall of voices, advised rulers and armies, monks and mercenaries alike. But in his old age, he carried no books, only silence. He came not to teach, but to forget. He laid his satchel down beside the throne, then noticed the cat, watching him with eyes like liquid night. He bowed, not deeply, not grandly, just enough. "I have words," he said, "too many." The cat blinked. He lit a small fire and fed his pages to it, one by one, not in anger, not in regret, only in peace. With each flame, he grew lighter. When all the papers were gone, he lay beside the cat, not touching her, just near enough to feel her warmth. And in the silence, he found the truth he'd been chasing for 40 years. The queen who came without a crown, they say she was once the Empress of the North. Ruthless, radiant, unmatched in strategy. But one morning she awoke, took off her circlet, and walked away from her court. No warning, no farewell, only silence. Her attendants searched in vain, but she had followed a dream of a stone throne with no voice upon it, and a gray cat sleeping below. Took her years, walking without titles, shedding her name like skin. And when she reached the palace, she was no longer a queen, only a woman. She knelt before the throne. The cat came to her, slow and unafraid. The woman whispered, "I was loud for too long." The cat licked her hand. For the first time in her life, the woman slept deeply. Not as a ruler, not as a fugitive, but as herself. And when she woke, she stayed not to rule the throne, but to sweep its floor, tend to ivy, and hum songs she hadn't sung since childhood. Asterisk, with time, word spread, not loudly, not quickly, but like water through stone. Pilgrims came not to pray to a deity, but to sit in stillness beside the cat. They didn't ask for miracles. They offered no incense, only silence, stillness, and breath. And though no monk declared it sacred, and no scripture was carved into its walls, the palace became a place of return. Return to self, to quiet, to truth beyond speech. And the cat? She remained unchanged. She did not teach. She did not bless. She did not speak. But all who came left lighter. Asterisk, one morning, before sunrise, the throne was gone. No broken marble, no sign of theft, just an empty space, and the cat curled in its exact center, her tail draped over where the king's foot would have rested. Whispers spread across villages and valleys. The throne has ascended. No, said others, the cat has inherited it. But the truth was simpler. When something is truly honored, not by fear, but by stillness, it dissolves, not vanishes, not transcends. The throne did not leave. It became every breath of peace the cat ever shared. And the cat? She did not move. She had never needed the throne, only the silence beneath it. In a quiet village nestled between rolling hills, there stood an ancient house, its windows reflecting the sky like dark pools. Inside, an old mirror hung on the wall, tall and silent, framed in silver that had dulled with age. But this was no ordinary mirror. It was said that when you looked into it, you would see nothing. Not a reflection of your face, not the room behind you, not even your shadow. Just an empty, glassy void. Many feared it. Some said it was cursed. Others whispered it was a window to a forgotten world. But the cat? She saw it differently. The cat first discovered the mirror on a rainy afternoon. She slipped through the creaking door and into the still air of the parlor, where the mirror waited. Curious, she approached and stared. The glass held no image. No flicker of whiskers, no gleam of eyes, only stillness. Yet the cat did not turn away. She sat before the mirror, tail curled neatly around her paws. And in that moment, something changed. She saw not her form, but her essence. Not a shape, but a presence. The mirror did not show what was. It revealed what could be, if only the need to be seen was set aside. Day after day, the cat returned. The villagers noticed her habit and began to wonder, why would a cat stare into a mirror that showed nothing? They whispered that the cat had learned to see beyond the surface. Beyond the image, beyond the self. A young woman, struggling with her own reflection, came to the house. She had spent years trapped by her image, judging every line, every scar, every shadow. But when she saw the cat sitting before the mirror, she felt a quiet invitation. Slowly, she sat beside the cat. Together, they looked into the void. No judgments, not expectations. Just presence. And in that shared stillness, the woman felt a shift. Not in the mirror, but in herself. The mirror did not change. It never reflected faces or places. But the cat and the young woman understood its gift. It showed nothing because it asked nothing. And sometimes the absence of image is the clearest truth. The cat's visits to the house with a mirror became a quiet ritual. No one disturbed her, except the occasional breeze that fluttered the curtains, or the soft patter of rain against the window panes. The villagers, slowly, began to talk in whispers, not about curses or fears, but about peace. The house, once forgotten, became a place people passed with gentler steps. One morning, a boy named Eli came. He was small, with a shy smile and eyes that held too many questions. His mother had told him stories of magic and monsters. But none of those stories spoke of quiet. Eli had never learned how to be still. When he saw the cat before the mirror, he hesitated, but the cat's gaze was patient, without hurry. He sat down, his knees tucked to his chest, and looked into the glass. At first, all he saw was emptiness. But slowly, as he watched, the emptiness filled with possibility. Eli began to visit every day. He did not speak much. He did not touch the cat. He simply learned to sit. To breathe. To be present in a way his young life had never allowed. And each day, the mirror showed nothing. But Eli's heart grew something. Nearby, an old painter named Mara heard the stories. Carried years of portraits and landscapes, but her brushes had grown still. Her art, once vibrant, had become hollow. She came with a worn satchel of paints. She did not expect miracles. She only wished to understand. Mara entered the house and found the cat. They regarded each other for a moment. Mara spoke softly. "I don't know what I see anymore." The cat blinked slowly. Mara sat beside the mirror. She picked up a brush, and for the first time in a decade, she painted not on canvas, but on the empty surface of her own silence. The mirror's surface remained unchanged, but Mara's soul was lighter. She smiled. The cat P-U-R-R-E-D ***. Some said the mirror had a secret, not a curse, but a gift. It reflected not the world outside, but the world within. It showed not form, but freedom. The cat seemed to understand this, and so did those who dared to look beyond. One evening, the house filled with visitors, not loud or crowded, but slow and reverent. A mother held her sleeping child. A scholar laid down his heavy books. Musician carried a silent lute. Each came seeking not answers, but space. The cat moved through the room, a thread of calm binding them all. Together, they faced the mirror's void. And in the void found themselves. The musician song. The musician strummed his lute quietly. The notes drifted like a soft breeze, weaving through the stillness. He sang a song without words, only tones that spoke of rest, of letting go, of peace. The cat listened, eyes half closed. The mirror caught no reflection, but the room shimmered with something unspoken. Scholar placed his books beside the mirror. He bowed deeply. I release you, he whispered. The cat brushed against his leg. He left, lighter than when he arrived. The mother laid her child on the floor before the mirror. She whispered, May you grow free from fear. The cat curled beside the child. The house breathed in a long, soft sigh. Eli sat before the mirror once more. He reached out his hand, not expecting to touch, but to feel. The glass was cool. The emptiness held no weight. And for the first time, Eli smiled without hesitation. Mara brought canvas and brush each day, her paintings filled with light and shadow, not to capture form, but to express feeling. She painted the mirror's emptiness, and in doing so, painted her own soul. The cat watched, a silent companion to her rebirth. Time passed, gentle as a whisper. The house no longer felt empty. It held the quiet lives of those who came. The mirror remained unchanged. But its meaning deepened. It became a sanctuary not of images, but of presence. The cat never looked into the mirror. She did not need to. Her peace came from something beyond reflection. From a knowing that being without expectation is enough. She taught those who watched her that loneliness is a story told by the restless mind, that emptiness is not absence, but space for something new, that to sit quietly, to breathe gently, to be present in silence is to touch wholeness. One night, a traveler arrived. She carried no baggage. She sought no answers. She knelt before the mirror. The cat approached her. They sat together, eyes closed. The mirror showed nothing. And for a moment, there was everything. The traveler remained silent beside the cat, the house, and the mirror. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying the faint scent of wildflowers and damp earth. She had come from far away, across mountains and rivers, guided not by maps, but by a quiet pull in her heart. As she sat, the world outside seemed to slow. The usual sounds of village life softened to a murmur. Even time itself felt as if it were holding its breath. She opened her eyes, but did not look at the mirror. Instead, she observed the cat, the way her fur caught the fading light, the gentle rise and fall of her chest, the steady calm of her presence. It was as if the cat carried within her the answer to a question. No one dared to ask not the answer spoken aloud, but the answer felt deep inside, beneath words, beneath thoughts. The traveler reached out a hand, not to touch, but to offer. The cat paused, and softly brushed her cheek. In that simple gesture. Centuries of silent knowing passed between them. The traveler closed her eyes again, and for the first time in many years, she felt free. Free, not because her past was gone, not because her worries had vanished, but because she had found a place where she could simply be. The house, the mirror, and the cat became her refuge. Not a prison, not a hiding place, but a sanctuary of stillness. Other visitors came and went, each bringing their own burdens, their own silences. Each finding comfort in the mirror's empty gaze. There was a blacksmith who no longer heard the ringing of his hammer as a command, but as music. There was the widow who stopped counting the days since her loss and began counting moments of quiet gratitude. There was the child who found courage not in loud words, but in the softness of a purring friend. The cat moved among them all, a living thread weaving peace through restless hearts. She asked nothing, gave nothing but presence, taught without speaking. Sometimes visitors would try to explain the mirror. The glass absorbs your fears. It reflects your soul. It is a gateway to another world. But the cat knew better. The mirror was simply still, surface that held no story, no judgment, no expectation. And that was its true gift. One evening, as twilight deepened, the traveler lit a candle near the mirror. The flame flickered gently. Shadows danced on the walls. The cat stretched, then leapt gracefully onto the windowsill. Outside, stars began to appear, small, distant lights in a vast, dark sky. The traveler whispered, "Maybe it's not about seeing, but about trusting what can't be seen." The cat's eyes glowed softly, a silent affirmation. For those who came to the house, the mirror, and the cat, life slowly shifted. Not dramatically, not suddenly, but like the slow turning of the earth. Beneath the stars, they learned to live with less noise. Less fear. Less need to fill every empty space. Because sometimes the greatest comfort is the quiet. Sometimes the deepest truth is in the absence. And sometimes the most profound connection is in simply sitting beside someone who asks for nothing but your presence. As the house breathed with the lives of those who sought it, the cat remained its heart. A reminder that loneliness is not a lack, but a space waiting to be filled with gentle acceptance. Among the visitors was an elderly man named Tomas. His steps were slow, and his eyes carried the weight of many winters. He came not with questions, but with quiet acceptance. He sat near the mirror, his hands folded loosely in his lap. The cat, sensing his stillness, settled beside him. Tomas spoke softly, more to himself than to anyone else. "I spent my life chasing shadows, fame, fortune, the approval of others." He paused, watching the mirror's empty surface. "But all those reflections, they never showed me who I really was." He reached out, but did not touch the glass. Instead, he closed his eyes, breathed deeply, and for the first time, let himself rest in the emptiness. The cat nudged his hand gently, a silent comfort. Nearby, a young woman named Lila watched, her heart full of noise anxieties tangled. Like vines. She had come seeking clarity, but found instead the mirror's empty calm. She took a deep breath and sat beside Tomas. The cat, now resting between them, seemed to soften the room. Lila felt her mind slow, the vines loosening. She whispered, "Maybe peace isn't something we find outside ourselves." The cat's steady presence was the only answer needed. Days turned into weeks. Visitors came, sat, and left lighter than before. The house's walls seemed to hum softly with quiet gratitude. One rainy afternoon, a poet named Elena arrived. Her words had once been her armor. Now they felt brittle and worn. She entered the house with a notebook, but left it untouched on a dusty table. Elena sat before the mirror, the cat curled on her lap. For hours, they remained still. No poems were written, no verses spoken, only the sound of slow breathing. When Elena finally stood, she smiled, not because she had new words, but because she had found a silent language, a song sung without voice. As night fell, the house filled with soft shadows. The candlelight flickered. The cat prowled quietly, a guardian of stillness. In the village outside, the stories of the house spread, not as legends of magic, but as invitations to rest. And somewhere, beyond sight and sound, the mirror waited, showing nothing. As it always had. A final visitor came, a child named Nia. Curious, bright-eyed, and unafraid, she approached the mirror and the cat with wonder. Nia knelt, placing a small flower beside the cat. She looked into the glass and smiled. The cat blinked slowly. A shared moment of knowing passed. Between them. The mirror showed nothing. But in that nothing, Nia saw everything. The house, the mirror, and the cat, a trinity of quiet grace. A refuge from the restless world. Asterisk, as the seasons shifted softly, the house itself seemed to breathe in rhythm with the lives it sheltered. The wooden floors creaked like old bones, comforting in their familiarity. The scent of aged paper mingled with damp stone and the faint perfume of lavender from a forgotten garden outside. On a cool spring morning, an herbalist named Mira came carrying bundles of dried flowers and leaves. Didn't speak much, but moved with quiet purpose. Myra arranged her plants carefully near the fireplace, an earthy aroma filling the room. She sat by the mirror, the cat curling into her lap as if drawn by the calm energy. Mira closed her eyes and inhaled deeply, grounding herself in the moment. She whispered softly, "Healing begins in stillness." Her fingers traced gentle patterns over the plants, as if weaving a silent prayer. The cat's purr resonated like a heartbeat, steady and warm. Together, they held space for those who sought comfort beyond words. Evenings were hushed. The only sound, the crackle of the fire and the occasional rustle of leaves outside. The cat often sat on the windowsill, watching the stars emerge, each one a distant flame, faint yet persistent. Sometimes, the cat's gaze lingered on her own reflection in the glass, but the mirror inside the house remained empty. It was as if the cat and the mirror shared a secret understanding that true reflection is not in images, but in presence. A scholar named Aaron arrived one chilly evening, his breath fogging the air as he entered. He carried a heavy tome, its leather cover cracked and worn. Aaron was known for seeking knowledge in scrolls and manuscripts, but here he placed his book aside. He sat quietly, before the mirror, the cat settling at his feet. For the first time, Aaron did not search for answers in words. Instead, he sought the silence between them. As hours passed, he felt his mind unclench. The relentless questions that had plagued him softened. The mirror showed nothing, But Aaron saw something profound. He closed his eyes, breathing in the stillness, allowing the cat's calm to seep into his being. Over time, the house welcomed all who were weary, a place where silence was not emptiness, but a full and rich presence. The cat, ever watchful, moved softly among the visitors. She was neither guide nor guardian, Dot simply a companion. One afternoon, a woman named Sora arrived. Her hands trembled with years of loss. She knelt by the mirror, tears glistening in her eyes. The cat brushed her fur. Gently against Sora's cheek, Sora whispered, "I've carried so much pain." The cat's steady purring offered no answers, only the comfort of being Dot in that quiet space. Sora found a flicker of peace dot the house, the mirror, the cat, a triad of silent grace, embracing those who came with heavy hearts. Asterisk, the seasons wove slowly onward, each day folding softly into the next. Outside, the village's rhythms pulsed quietly, the distant clatter of carts, the murmur of voices drifting like a breeze. Yet inside the house, time seemed to stretch and breathe like a gentle sigh. One evening, as twilight draped the sky in muted shades of blue and violet, a solitary figure arrived, a young teacher named Aiden. Weary from the demands of his days filled with questions and restless minds, Aiden stepped inside the quiet house, feeling the weight of his own expectations begin to lift. He noticed the cat perched calmly on a wooden beam, eyes reflecting the last light of day. Without words, he took a seat near the mirror, folding his hands in his lap, exhaling a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. The cat padded softly to his side and curled beside him, warmth spreading like a balm. Aiden closed his eyes, surrendering to the stillness that wrapped around him like a familiar cloak. For a time, there were no lessons, no answers, just the simple rhythm of breath, the steady purring, and the silent invitation to be present. In the days that followed, more visitors found their way to the house, each carrying stories unspoken, hearts heavy or hopeful. An elderly gardener brought cuttings from his favorite blooms. A young poet traced invisible words in the dust. A father cradled his newborn daughter, seeking peace in the quiet spaces. And the cat remained still, unassuming, a steady presence, anchoring them all in the gentle embrace of now. Outside, rain fell soft and steady, washing leaves and stone alike. Inside, the faint scent of wet earth mingled with old wood and warm breath. The mirror, ever unchanged, held no image. It offered no answers. Yet in its emptiness lay a vastness that invited reflection not of face or form, but of soul. Asterisk, as the days passed, the house transformed quietly from a forgotten relic into a sanctuary of presence. Each visitor brought with them the soft tremors of their lives, hopes, fears, memories, and left a little lighter, as if the stillness had absorbed words could not. One morning, as dawn filtered through stained glass, a man named Ezra arrived. His eyes held the fatigue of countless journeys, and his hands trembled not from age, but from the weight of unseen burdens. He moved slowly toward the mirror, the cat watching with gentle curiosity. Without hesitation, he sat down, folding his knees close, breathing in the silence like a long-lost song. Ezra whispered, "I've been running, from voices, from shadows. But here I don't have to run." The cat settled beside him, a soft purr rising like a heartbeat in the quiet room. Nearby, a woman named Yara unfolded a blanket and settled herself. She carried the scent of jasmine and cedar, a traveler's aroma, mingled with the earthiness of home. She opened a small journal, but instead of writing, she let her eyes close and her mind rest. The cat jumped lightly onto her lap, weaving through the folds of fabric, offering warmth. Yara's breath slowed, and the tension in her shoulders melted away. She felt the stillness seep into her bones, as if the house itself was a gentle wave carrying her toward calm. Evening came, wrapped in cool shadows and soft light. The cat, ever watchful, moved through the visitors, an unspoken comfort, a thread of quiet connection. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the scent of rain and wild herbs. One night, as the moon hung low and silver in the sky, a child named Noor arrived with her mother. Noor's eyes were wide with wonder, and her steps were light. She approached the mirror, the cat greeting her with a slow blink. Noor reached out a tiny hand to touch the glass dot, though it showed nothing. The moment shimmered with promise. She smiled. A pure, simple smile that echoed through the room like a song without words. The mother watched quietly, feeling the weight of years ease from her heart. Together, they sat in silence, wrapped in the quiet embrace of the house. Days blended into nights in a seamless dance. The cat remained the still center of a gentle storm, a beacon of calm in a restless world. For those who sought refuge here, the mirror was not a window to the past or future, but a door to the present. A space where the noise of the outside world faded, and the soft pulse of breath and being took its place. With the passing of months, the house's quiet heart grew stronger, beating softly through the lives it touched. The cat, ever patient, remained a silent guide, her presence a calm that needed no words. One chilly autumn day, a young artist named Celine arrived. Her hands were stained with paint, her eyes searching for something beyond the colors she'd tried to capture. She stepped into the house, the faint scent of pine and earth greeting her like an old friend. The cat observed her quietly, then approached. With delicate steps, Celine knelt beside the mirror, setting down her brushes and canvas. For a long time, she did nothing but breathe, as stillness wrapped around her like a warm shawl. Her thoughts, once tangled and restless, began to unravel. She felt a gentle unfolding within, like leaves opening, slowly toward the sun. Celine reached out to stroke the cat's soft fur. The cat purred, a low, steady hum that resonated in the quiet room. Celine whispered, "Here I am free to be." Outside, the wind carried the rustle of golden leaves. The sun dipped low, casting amber light through the windows. Later, a man named Elias arrived, carrying the scent of rain and old books. He was a scholar who had spent years chasing knowledge, but lately had found it slipping through his fingers like water. He sat before the mirror, a cat settling beside him, as if welcoming an old friend. Elias closed his eyes and let go of the endless questions. For the first time, he simply allowed himself to be. The cat's presence was a quiet anchor in the sea of his thoughts. The mirror remained empty, but in its void, Elias found a vastness that no book had ever revealed. Evening came with a soft hush, the house breathing gently beneath a blanket of stars. Visitors came and went like whispered prayers, each leaving a little lighter than before. And the cat? She slept beneath the empty throne of stillness. As the soft light of dawn stretched through the windows, the house seemed to awaken slowly, in no rush, just as the cat stretched her limbs and settled once more near the mirror's silent glass. Morning a traveler named Leora entered the quiet sanctuary. She carried the scent of distant seas and sun-warmed stones, her footsteps gentle on the worn wooden floor. Her eyes held stories of places far beyond the village stories of deserts and forests of solitude and company. Leora sat quietly before the mirror, the cat folding herself neatly beside her. No words were spoken, none were needed. Instead, the silence spoke for itself, vast, deep, inviting. Leora closed her eyes and breathed deeply, feeling the stillness settle inside. Like a soft blanket dot, she thought of the restless waves she'd seen on her journeys and marveled at how here, inside this old house, the world moved differently, slower, softer, as if breathing in rhythm with the cat's steady purr. Across the room, a young man named Joran arrived, clutching a small wooden flute. His music had once filled bustling markets and lively gatherings, but lately his melodies had grown quiet and tentative. He approached the cat and the mirror with a gentle smile, settling down nearby. Without lifting his flute to play, he simply listened to the soft sounds of the house, the rhythm of his own breath, the peaceful presence of the cat. Minutes passed like droplets of rain, each falling lightly, each dissolving into the calm. Jore closed his eyes, feeling the tension melt from his shoulders. The ache in his chest softened. The mirror reflected nothing, but in its emptiness was a vast openness, a space free of judgment or expectation. The cat stirred and padded over to nuzzle Joran's hand, a small, warm connection in the quiet stillness. Even as the seasons turned, leaves falling, snow melting, flowers blooming, the house remained a place apart, where time slowed to the pace of gentle breathing. Visitors came and went, carrying their lives' burdens, their hopes, their weariness, and all found some measure of rest. One late autumn afternoon, a woman named Seraphine arrived with a bundle of dried herbs and whispered prayers. She moved carefully, her steps soft as fallen leaves. She lit a small incense stick, the fragrant smoke curling lazily upward, filling the air with whispers of sage and lavender. The cat watched her calmly, then settled on Seraphine's lap, a living warm weight. Seraphine closed her eyes and inhaled deeply, the smoke mingling with the cool air and the quiet heartbeat of the house. No words were spoken, only shared breath and presence. And somewhere, beyond sight and sound, the mirror remained a glass that showed nothing, yet reflected everything. The days grew shorter, and the amber light of late afternoon filtered softly through the curtains. Outside, the rustling of dried leaves whispered stories of change, while inside, the house held steady in its quiet embrace. A gentle breeze stirred the pages of a forgotten book left on a side table, its soft fluttering mingling with the faint scent of pine and earth. The cat lounged nearby, eyes half closed, her breathing slow and even like the steady ticking of time itself. That afternoon, an old gardener named Theo arrived, his hands, calloused from years of tending soil and roots, were weathered but tender. He carried with him a small pot of freshly dug earth and a handful of tiny wildflowers, their petals delicate and pale. Theo placed the pot gently near the mirror, as if offering a silent gift. Then, settling beside the cat, he closed his eyes and let the quiet seep into his bones. In the stillness, Theo remembered the seasons of his life, the harsh winters, the brief springs, the summers full of bloom, and the slow fading of autumn. He felt the pulse of the earth beneath his feet and the vastness within his own heart. The mirror reflecting only emptiness, seemed to cradle his memories like a soft, dark pool. Later, a young writer named Myra came to the house, her notebook filled with lines half-formed, thoughts tangled like vines. She had sought inspiration in bustling cities and quiet cafes. But here, she found something different. Myra sat by the window, watching the cat bask in the dappled sunlight. She felt the weight of words lift from her shoulders, and the gentle flow of calm filled the spaces between thoughts. She looked toward the mirror, its glass smooth and empty. Instead of frustration, Myra found peace, a space where stories could rest and grow in their own time. The cat, a living shadow, curled beside her feet. A steady heartbeat in the soft, quiet evening fell like a soft curtain, and the house glowed warmly with a flicker of candlelight. The visitors settled into gentle silence, each breathing in the stillness, each carrying a small spark of calm back into the world outside. The cat's eyes glimmered softly in the candlelight, reflecting a wisdom that needed no voice. In her presence, loneliness dissolved like mist, replaced by a quiet companionship that asked for nothing but simply being. Asterisk, the night deepened, soft and endless like a dark ocean. Outside, the stars hung quietly, distant and steady. Inside the house, the air was cool but inviting, filled with the faint scent of cedar and warm wood. The cat sat perched on the windowsill, watching the world beyond the swaying branches. The gentle dance of shadows under moonlight. A soft knock came at the door. A traveler named Leon stepped inside, carrying only a small satchel and weariness in her eyes. She moved slowly, her footsteps careful and light. Lean sat beside the mirror, and the cat moved toward her with deliberate grace, curling into her lap, closed her eyes, breathing in the silence like a balm. She thought of the long roads she had traveled, twisting paths. Uncertain destinations got here, in the stillness. She felt a quiet anchor. No images appeared in the mirror, only an endless, soothing void. And in that void, Leon found the freedom to simply rest. As dawn crept over the horizon, the house seemed to sigh softly, welcoming a new day. Visitors stirred. Quietly, their breaths slow and even. The cat stretched, then settled back beside the mirror, a silent sentinel guarding the sanctuary of peace. Asterisk, the first light of morning filtered softly through the curtains, casting gentle patterns of gold and amber across the wooden floor. The house stirred slowly, as if awakening from a long, restful sleep. The faint rustle of leaves outside blended with the soft hum of the cat's purring, quiet symphony of peace. A woman named Elara entered the room carrying a small bundle of wildflowers, their petals still fresh with morning dew. Her footsteps were light, and her gaze carried the weariness of many long nights. She approached the mirror with reverence, placing the flowers gently on the windowsill nearby. Sitting down, she folded her hands in her lap, her breath steadying, as she allowed the stillness to seep into her being. The cat, sensing Elara's quiet openness, curled beside her, radiating warmth and calm. Elara closed her eyes, surrendering to the gentle silence, feeling the weight of worry slowly dissolve. Outside, the wind whispered softly through the trees, carrying the faint scent of earth and rain. The mirror, as always, showed nothing but empty glass, reflecting neither face nor form, but inviting an inner reflection deeper than any image. As the day unfolded, more visitors arrived, each carrying their own stories, their own silences. A young musician cradled a lute, fingers trembling with forgotten melodies. An elderly scholar laid down his worn books, seeking not knowledge, but quiet. A child watched the cat with wide, curious eyes, learning the language of calm without words. A cat moved among them like a living thread of stillness, her presence a gentle reminder that in the absence of noise and expectation, peace can be found. As twilight deepened, the house settled into a quiet hush. The cat rested comfortably near the mirror, eyes half closed, her breathing slow and steady, like the gentle rhythm of the night itself. The visitors, each touched by the stillness, sat or stood softly, their faces serene and unburdened. The mirror remained unchanged, an empty surface reflecting nothing outward, but inviting everything inward. It held no images, no answers, only a vast space where the restless mind could finally rest. And the cat, ever calm, was a silent companion on that journey, a reminder that true peace is not found in filling the void, but in embracing it. So now, as you listen here with the cat's gentle presence beside you, allow your thoughts to soften, your breath to slow, and your body to settle. Imagine yourself resting in that quiet house, embraced by stillness and gentle light. With each breath, sink deeper into calm. With each moment, feel the quiet spreading through you, soft, steady, peaceful. And as the mirror shows nothing, let yourself release what you no longer need to hold. Let the cat's silent watchfulness guide you into a restful sleep. Sleep well, embraced by the calm you carry within.